Public Affairs very much thanks Residco, our sole corporate underwriter, for helping to make the production of this show possible.
The overwhelming vast majority of those carjackers are young people, 17 years
Juveniles.
and younger. But that doesn't include all the crime. The Tribune did a study of violent crime in the first year of the pandemic, when schools were shut down, schools were completely shut down. And did you know that 8% of the murders were committed by individuals 17 years and younger, and 9% of the shootings were committed by individuals 17 years and younger, and 32% of the assaults were committed by individuals 17 years and younger. So the bottom line here is shutting schools down, keeping schools closed, not having schools open, and even when schools reopen, not having an extended day, extended a year, not having activities that are school-based to keep the kids off the street and engaged. Those were also contributing factors, and those were man-made decisions. Those were decisions made by the mayor's office to cave into the teachers' union repeatedly that kept hundreds of thousands of students walking the street. The public is not afraid of the cops. The public is afraid the cops can't protect them. And they're afraid the cops can't protect them because they don't have officers on the local beat that they get to know and that they're familiar with. There's no witness protection program, so that if they are giving testimony, they can be protected. If the cops do make an arrest, there's a strong likelihood that Kim Foxx is not going to charge them. And if they are charged, there's an even higher likelihood that they're going to be released on felony bail and sent right back into the communities. I would be prepared to push, to bypass the state's attorney when she makes decisions not to prosecute, and to create what I refer to as a judicial review unit that would be able to draw public attention to decisions that the state's attorney makes and that the judges make when it comes to not charging people, when it comes to releasing dangerous felons on bail, when it comes to imposing light sentences on repeat offenders. And those are things that the mayor can do unilaterally.
So unless you've been living under a rock for the last 2 decades, you probably know Paul Vallas. But the question everybody wants to know as we tape the show on April 12th is, Paul Vallas, are you running for mayor of the city of Chicago?
Well, we'll make our decision before Memorial Day, but we're close to giving it the green light.
So in 30 seconds, what does it depend on?
Obviously, it depends on whether or not the support is there. So, we want to make sure that we've got the organizational structure and the basic support needed to be successful. So we're very optimistic that we're going to be there, and we'll make a final decision.
And if you do, Paul, can you save Chicago?
I believe I can. I've been doing governmental rescues all my life, beginning with when I was the city budget director in the early 90s, to taking over the Chicago Public Schools, to rebuilding schools in New Orleans after Katrina. So this has always been my vocation.
Let's give them a preview, and
Sure.
we'll come back and do more detail
Okay.
on each. Because number one issue seems to be violent crime. Am I right? Is that the number one issue in the city of Chicago?
All the polls indicate between
So
60
just
and
tell
70.
us in 30 seconds, how would you fix it?
Well, how would I fix it?
Violent crime.
Well, the first thing I would do is I would lay out a policing strategy that makes sure that police officers are sent into the community, so that you've got police officers covering every single beat. Right now, what they've done is they've pulled officers from the local beats and they've got them under a central command, and they're dispatching them from one hotspot to another. So on many times, you have some of the most violent districts where maybe half the beats are covered. The second thing I would do is I would fill the police vacancies. I would restore the police positions that were cut, and I would also work overtime to fill the police vacancies, because 1,500 police officers have exited the city in the last 15 months, and they're simply not getting the replacements. And that's due to a combination of reasons. One is the police don't feel that they have the support. Two is the city has really had no strategy for recruiting new officers, so they need to fill the vacancies. The third thing that I would do is I would focus on setting up a program so that you can ensure that witnesses and victims can be protected, because there's no program to protect witnesses or victims. Individuals in the community are not afraid of the police, but they're afraid that the police can't protect them. So the bottom line is you've got to invest your resources in public safety, because if you can't keep the city safe, everything becomes undone. You're not going to have investments in the community without having safe neighborhoods. You're not going to stem the dramatic exodus of the middle class, unless neighborhoods are safe. At the end of the day, public safety is absolutely critical.
Some have said, and maybe you, we need to start treating criminals as criminals, not as victims.
Well,
is that right? Do you agree with that?
Well, absolutely. Look, from the so-called Criminal Reform Act to the way the city and the mayor's office has often demonized the police and scapegoated the police, to the benefit of the criminals. The bottom line is, you've got to let the police do proactive policing. There are so many impediments to proactive policing right now. The police a lot of times are reluctant to be aggressive and reluctant to be proactive, because they're for fear of being reprimanded, for fear of being contradicted, for fear of not being supported. Look at the number of arrests that are made for serious offenses that the state's attorney has elected not to charge people. Or look at the number of individuals who are arrested for serious felonies who are then released on felony bail and sent right back into the community. I think 75% of the number of individuals who are arrested for serious felonies are in effect returned to the community through felony bail. They return to community wearing ankle bracelets. So the bottom line is the police have got to be supportive. You've got to allow the police to move and to be proactive. And plus, the city has also diverted critical policing time with the mayor's vaunted and much celebrated by her positive community interactions, where the police are giving quotas. Every day they have to have a positive community interaction, X number of positive community interactions, whether it's waving at somebody, whether it's conversing with somebody on a street corner, and they literally at roll call are recording. And when an officer has a positive community interaction, they're supposed to record it, and the districts are celebrated. The districts are celebrated on their number of positive community interactions, and not necessarily celebrated on their ability to reduce the level of violence. And so, for example, the 11th district had, I think, 103 murders last year, or maybe it was 108. I'm not sure of the number, which means it was the most violent district in the city, which means it was the most violent police district in the country. And yet they were celebrated because they were in the top 3 of the police districts with positive community interactions. Okay. So on the one hand, you've got the police, recording and being mandated to engage in these positive community interactions, and being restrained from being proactive about making arrests. So while we're getting these huge increases in positive community interactions, in the last 2 years, there's been over a 70% reduction in police arrests. So if you're not arresting, how are you getting dangerous criminals off the street? And if you are getting them off the street, are you keeping them off the street?
So I said we go to the other topics and come back. It's so good. We'll just stay with this.
Okay.
We'll stay with crime, then we'll go to education, then we'll go to pensions, then we'll cover property taxes. You'll have solved everything, and you can go home and have a good night's sleep.
In 30 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, if we've got the right person that committed the crime, well, then we should probably detain them. And if they're dangerous, we don't let them out on bail. And if we have the right person, what do we do next? We've investigated, we've detained. What's the one word that maybe is missing in this whole thing? A person there and they are accused. What do we do? Just go home?
Well, look, let me give you a stunning...
I'm just looking for the word prosecute.
Well,
prosecute. No, because let me just stay with it for a second. Let me just interrupt this one time.
Yeah.
Because people say we're not prosecuting because we have a state's attorney, Kim Foxx, who doesn't really want to prosecute.
What we're doing,
Is that too harsh?
no, it's not too harsh at all. We're doing three things. We're not arresting. Okay. Only 30% of the murderers since 2017 have been actually arrested.
Okay.
Only 4% of the shooters. Imagine that. That means if you don't get killed, chances are they're never going to find who shot you. Okay. And when we do arrest, Kim Foxx doesn't charge at 3 times the rate that her predecessors did not charge. So she is reluctant to charge. She clearly isn't charging for minor offenses, not like shoplifting or vandalism or things like that. Forget it. I mean, they're even carjackings. I mean, at the end of the day, but violent offenders, she's refusing to charge violent offenders at 3 times the rate. And then if they do arrest and they do charge, they're releasing. They're sending between, I think it was close to 75% of the individuals who are arrested for felonies, for violent felonies and or for serious gun crimes are in fact provided with felony bail. So they're sent right back into the community.
Who does that? Who makes that decision? Tell me about that.
It's a combination. Clearly, if the state's attorney is not insisting on high bail, so it's a combination of the state's attorney and the judges.
Yeah,
so,
go to the judges. Who's the chief judge? Does that matter? Let's call out people, their names. Who are they?
Well, look, the judges need to be, whether from Judge Evans all the way on down.
Who's Judge Evans?
The judges need to be responsible.
Okay.
But let me tell you, this is the point that I'm trying to make.
Okay.
On any given day, between 80 to 90% of violent offenders, of the individuals who committed violent crimes, are walking the streets. So you want to know why the police can't clear cases? Because the community doesn't feel protected. There were 58 mass shootings in Chicago last year. Chicago led the nation in mass shootings, 58 mass shootings. 4 more people shot at a single incident. They made 1 arrest last year in the mass shootings. The public is not afraid of the cops. The public is afraid the cops can't protect them. And they're afraid the cops can't protect them because they don't have officers on the local beat that they get to know and that they're familiar with. There's no witness protection program, so that if they are giving testimony, they can be protected. If the cops do make an arrest, there's a strong likelihood that Kim Foxx is not going to charge them. And if they are charged, there's an even higher likelihood that they're going to be released on felony bail and sent right back into the community. So what you have to do is you have to have enough police officers to man the beats, to investigate the serious crimes. You've got to, if you have to bypass Foxx, which you can, and go to judges to bring charges against these individuals who she's refusing to charge, sometimes individuals who have been arrested for murder. And if you have to go in and you have to press the judges and you have to press the legislature to amend the Justice Reform Act, the so-called Justice Reform Act, so that you're simply not ending bail as we know it. If those are the things you have to do to make the city safe, then those are the things that have to be done.
So one thing you mentioned was carjackings. Let's take a look at some data.
Yeah.
We've got a slide here from WirePoints that looks at the data from 2010 to 2021 and says carjackings in Chicago during that 10-year period or so are up 222%. But they've circled, if you look at that slide, the years 2020 and 2021, their carjackings went from the prior year, 603 in 2019, to 1,400 in 2020, to 1,800 in 2021. So most of that increase is right there. I mean, and so that seems, these are carjackings, right? And people may get somebody put a gun in their face and say, get out. These are dangerous things. I mean, I would think with those numbers, the legislature in Illinois would be on fire. Like, do something, right?
Well, not only
are they on fire? Are they doing something?
Well, I don't see it. And
does the mayor have control? Can you go to the legislature and say, I need this?
Well,
if you were mayor of the city of Chicago?
You can, but I also think that if you're going to wait for the legislature, and I think you need to go to the legislature. You need to go to the legislature with an agenda. But sometimes if you go to legislature, going to the legislature is like waiting for hell to freeze over sometimes on some of these issues. Let me point out that there's more that the city can do itself. I mean, like making arrests, like aggressively going after the carjackers, like putting public pressure on the state's attorney to charge these individuals for carjackings. It's like going to the courts and trying to get the courts to deny bail to individuals who are engaged or are involved in There are things that can be done that they're simply not done. But notice
the mayor can do that, is what you're saying. You
the
don't
mayor
have to
can
plead
do
with
that.
somebody else.
Yeah,
The mayor,
right. Look,
she has control over the superintendent of police.
She has
right?
control. Look, when you're spending the overwhelming majority of your time haranguing police superintendents because they're not accumulating enough positive community interactions. I mean, I could wave at you and you could wave at me back and I'll record that as a positive community interaction. And when you're not pushing police officers to be really aggressive and real proactive about getting at this type of crime, as well as things like shoplifting and burglaries and vandalism and things like that. I mean, what do you expect when you have no enforcement? What do you expect when the number of individuals who are being arrested for carjackings are in the single digits? And if they are arrested, chances are they're not going to be charged. Let me also point out that that dramatic increase in carjackings also occurred during a period of time when schools were literally shut down. For 15 consecutive months, school campuses were in fact shut down. So you had literally 340,000 students on the street. Let me point out that the overwhelming vast majority of those carjackers are young people, 17 years
Juveniles.
and younger. But that doesn't include all the crime. The Tribune did a study of violent crime in the first year of the pandemic, when schools were shut down, schools were completely shut down. And did you know that 8% of the murders were committed by individuals 17 years and younger, and 9% of the shootings were committed by individuals 17 years and younger, and 32% of the assaults were committed by individuals 17 years and younger. So the bottom line here is shutting schools down, keeping schools closed, not having schools open, and even when schools reopen, not having an extended day, extended a year, not having activities that are school-based to keep the kids off the street and engaged. Those were also contributing factors, and those were man-made decisions. Those were decisions made by the mayor's office to cave into the teachers' union repeatedly that kept hundreds of thousands of students walking the street. And let me point out that
so it's all there's multiple relationships.
There's
here.
multiple relationships. Let me give you one more statistic. During COVID, over 150 school-aged children, 18 years and younger, have been murdered on the streets of Chicago. And the number is actually higher. That was the number that Wire Points put out, I think, a couple months ago. During that same period, I think 7 children died from COVID-related illnesses, individuals who died from COVID. So the bottom line is clearly, it wasn't COVID itself, but rather our response to COVID, which created conditions that significantly increased the burden that we're putting on our police department, on our rank and file police officers, to stem this escalating rising crime in Chicago.
And in 2015, the Cook County Board President then and now, Tony Preckwinkle, persuaded the legislature, I think largely her, that we should not allow county attorneys to have the choice whether they think a juvenile should be prosecuted as an adult. Sometimes these things take time.
They do.
A year or two after a while, the gangs realized this was a good thing for them because they could have the shorties do the carjackings and tell the shorties, hey, you're going to have 2 weeks in juvie, right?
I know for a fact that hasn't had an impact, because when I worked for the legislature back in the days when we met for the first time, I think you remember, I actually worked on legislation. I moonlighted for the Judiciary Committee one year. I was on the Education and Revenue Committees. When we worked on the automatic transfer provisions that basically said juveniles who commit like serious offenses there was the option of automatic transfer and for them being treated as adults. So that put the pressure that the state's attorneys did not have that discretion to decide
Right.
whether or not they wanted to do charge or not charge.
So when we look at the big picture, if we were to go back and take a look just briefly at some of these slides, since 1960, we're in 2022 now, the 60 years. If we look at slide 1, we see Chicago, we see the plotting of homicides, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York. Chicago leads in big city homicides. They started out, these lines were kind of together, but once in 2020, Chicago's very high, much higher than Los Angeles, which is somewhat above New York. So how long has this problem been coming? How much of this is due to the current mayor? How do you sort through that?
Well, let me point out that really for the last 5 or 6 years, Chicago has had as many murders as New York and LA combined. But let me tell you a more stunning statistic, because you hear Lightfoot say it all the time. You hear Fox say it all the time. Violent crime is up everywhere. Violent crime is up all the cities. Look, violent crime is up in LA and New York. Well, let me give you an even more stunning statistic. New York, New York's murder rate is up, but New York's murder rate compared to its peak murders in the 90s, when you had the crack cocaine wars. New York's murders last year were about 25% what they were in the 1990s. Chicago's murders last year compared to their peak in the 1990s is closer to 90%. So while New York has returned to maybe 1/4 the level of murders they had when murders were at the peak in the 1990s, before this great plunge that occurred, Chicago's murder rate is almost at that same level, which is frightening, which tells you, what is Chicago doing differently, or what is Chicago not doing to allow the violent crime to escalate to where we're actually seeing the levels of violent crime that we saw in the 1990s during the height of the crack cocaine war.
And it's across categories. If we look at slide 3, nearly all Chicago crimes are up in 2022, the first 12 weeks of 2022 versus the first 12 weeks of 2021. Theft is up, motor vehicle theft, burglary, aggravated battery. So all these things continue. I mean, and we're post-COVID. Some people said, oh, that was COVID. So we had 800 homicides in 2020 and 2021. The mayor may say because that was COVID. I mean, was it all COVID?
No. I mean, was it all COVID?
Yeah.
Again, I look at those numbers and I compare. You compare Chicago's murder rates with New York's murder rates, where, I mean, New York is at 25% of their peak level in the 1990s. We're almost equal to the 1990s in terms of the number of issues. Let me tell you, COVID's been a factor, but it's not COVID itself, rather the way we've responded to COVID, because don't underestimate the degree to which having 340,000 kids out of school walking the streets significantly increased the amount of crime in the city. Not only the number of murders and shootings, but also the number of carjackings and vandalisms and assaults. So clearly this contributed to the problem. But the problem in Chicago, it's the combination of the way we responded to COVID with the fact that we also entered a period where they reduced the size of the police department, they eliminated vacancies, they failed to have a strategy to recruit new police officers, to replace the exodus of police officers that were leaving. And they so demoralized the police with their restraints and in some cases punishing proactive policing. And they're putting police officers on 12-hour work days and canceling days off, that there has been this massive exodus of officers, so that, even if we wanted a larger police department, the police officers are leaving at 4 times the rate that they're being replaced. And this is all a leadership issue. This has nothing to do with COVID. Police officers leaving because they're constantly being abused, or they're not supported, or because they're constantly put on 12-hour work days, or their days are being canceled. I mean, not only the stress on the officers, but the stress that it is causing, the punishing impact that it has on their families. I mean, these are all decisions made by the mayor and decisions made by her police chief and the police department's first deputies. These are These are decisions that are being made that are degrading the department and that are forcing officers out at record levels. And obviously those are decisions that need to be reversed. And that's a leadership issue. It's not a COVID issue.
To fix the crime problem, in large part by changing a lot in ways prosecution occurs, bail is set, the police department is run.
All right, well, let me tell you what I would do.
Yeah.
Yes, let me tell you what I would do immediately. The first thing I would do is ask officers to give me a year to right the ship, so to speak, in terms of their schedules, the way they're treated, the restrictions on proactive policing. And I believe, and as you well know, I helped negotiate an 8-year contract, police contract recently with the city. The police had gone 4 years without having a contract. So I've worked with the police. I've been interacting with the police for the better part of 3 years. We have 4 police officers in the family. So at the end of the day, I'm confident that I could stop the flow of officers and that I would be able to lay out a strategy on how to fill the vacancies. The second thing that I would do is I would incentivize and call back, like Giuliani did when he first got elected mayor, retired police officers to come back to the department to work as investigators, to work to support the detectives division so that you can clear cases, so that you don't have 30% clearance rates on murders and 4% clearance rates on shootings. I would bring 100 officers back to work as analysts to work murder cases, because we've got 1/6 the number of detectives that they have in New York City. We have 184 detectives working, 800 new homicides last year. That's a fraction. Not only do they have 4 to 5 new murder cases a year that they have to handle, but they also have the 10 or 20 murder cases that remain unresolved for the last 4 to 5 years. So that's the second thing that I would do. And the third thing that I would do is I would be prepared to push, to bypass the state's attorney when she makes decisions not to prosecute, and to create what I refer to as a judicial review unit that would be able to draw public attention to decisions that the state's attorney makes and that the judges make when it comes to not charging people, when it comes to releasing dangerous felons on bail, when it comes to imposing light sentences on repeat offenders. And those are things that the mayor can do unilaterally. And the final thing that I would do almost immediately is very quickly set up a witness protection program, which you can do. And you can use money from confiscations of property and monies on people who you arrest. You could use the fines that you impose on individuals who violate the public way in order to provide the support needed so that individuals feel that if they go to the police and they cooperate and they help them clear cases, the police officers are going to be able to provide them with protection, whether it's relocating them using Section 8 vouchers or for that matter, having enough support so that the detectives can ensure that the witnesses are being monitored and the witnesses are being supported. Those are things that you could do unilaterally.
So flashback, when you ran for mayor last, I think you were advocating that
all those things.
All those things.
Yeah.
And how many of those happened?
None.
That's what you would do differently.
Yeah. And incidentally, at 40 community forums with Lori Lightfoot sitting there and a bunch of other candidates, I constantly talked about filling vacancies. I constantly talked about witness protection. I constantly talked about bringing back retired detectives, like they did in New York, in London, like they did in Dallas after Brown left, to in effect supplement the detective ranks. These are things that you can do unilaterally right now.
For a lot of the issues in education, Paul will tell us about that, I'm sure, when he comes back. And you come back next week and every week to Public Affairs.